We're about to take some close-up nature shots of the cherry blossoms in Hyde Park. Woke up at 6 a.m. today. It was a very early start for me, but for mornings like this, it's worth it. You can see behind me, the light is coming through this wooded area really nicely. You're seeing lots of long shadows. Ultimately, that's why we woke up so early, so that we can hopefully capture that beautiful warm glow on some of these cherry blossoms up close. We're gonna get there soon and we'll see what the light's looking like. I just arrived where the cherry blossoms mainly are in Hyde Park, and I'm astonished at the light that we've been able to make it here for. The light is hitting the cherry blossoms just perfectly right now. So I'm gonna put the vlog down for a second and just go take some pictures, and we'll recap and start to talk about some of the fundamentals after this light starts to go away. I'm taking a little break from shooting because I wanted to go over some of the things that I'm thinking about while I'm taking these photos. The biggest consideration or thing that I'm thinking about is the changing light. Because it's so early in the day, because the sun has just risen, the light is changing very quickly. So as the light rises, these different parts of the trees are actually getting illuminated. These white leaves are reflecting a lot of light, and that change in light is very, very noticeable. So there's lots of photographers here right now. You're seeing them move from different trees as the light progresses. What I'm shooting today really lends itself for there being a lot of other people's presence. When you're shooting close up, you don't need to worry too much about other people being in your shot. And yeah, the only other consideration that I'm really looking for is, again, interesting light. Ultimately, when I'm walking around, since I'm shooting close up photography, I'm looking for little sections of light that are interesting. I don't need the whole tree necessarily to be illuminated nicely. I'm just looking for one certain little portion that looks interesting, and then experimenting with my composition once I find that area and see how to actually compose that part of the tree. I'm mainly shooting with the built-in iPhone camera for this, but I'm also experimenting with the halide camera. This is allowing me to get a closer to macro shot out of the iPhone. It's not true macro, but it's a lot more close up than what the built-in iPhone camera offers. This is a paid-for app, so I'm just running off of a free trial. I'm gonna get back to shooting and try some more compositions and see what else I can find. I'll be back soon. Some of the people here I've been noticing are manipulating the trees. Please don't do this when you take nature photos. Respect the natural environment that you're taking a picture of, whether that's a tree, wildlife, whatever it may be. Don't step in the garden. Don't manipulate the tree, because you might break it. And even if you have the best intentions, you're being super careful, you're still leaving it up to chance as soon as you start to physically engage with that. Just capture what you can. One of the things that's working out really well when I'm taking pictures of these trees is shooting against the bright blue sky behind it rather than shooting into the tree. Isolating these leaves away from the tree is helping to focus the attention on just that certain part of the image. When you shoot into the tree, it's really hard for your eye to kind of focus on one part because there's so many leaves and branches within the tree for your eye to kind of jump around between. I'm looking for ways that I can isolate that little portion that I actually want the viewer to focus on. It can be easy when you're shooting close-up photos to forget that there's also a background behind that subject. So I'm trying to have a conscious effort to think about the background. So we just explored a little bit closer that way. There were a few more cherry blossom trees that were in really beautiful light, but the photos really weren't happening there because it was right on the water, and when it's right on the water, you get a lot more wind. And when you're shooting close-up photos, wind is not your friend. You'll notice in this footage that the wind is really moving those cherry blossom branches around. That's not good for close-up photos. Any type of movement is really dramatized. It's going to be really hard to catch focus on one of those elements and keep a steady composition if it's constantly moving. So we ended up leaving. It just wasn't working out, even though the light's great, even though the trees looked beautiful. These areas over here are a little bit more sheltered from the wind, and we can actually get some good photos over here. So explore, but if it's not working out, recognize that it's not working out and you can backpedal. That's quite all right. The other note that I want to make about exploration is, even though I'm here looking for the cherry blossom trees, that's the reason I came, it's the reason I woke up early today, I'm still looking around at everything. I'm not letting that be my only focus. Now that I'm here at the park, the cherry blossom trees might be my main subject, but the park is my subject. I'm looking at all of the different things that this park has to offer, such as the tulips that seem to have just been planted. There's some nice light that we're hitting them. So I'm looking at everything. I'm looking all around me and trying to capture everything that I can see, which right now I actually just spotted a bird in this tree. So I'm going to cut this short and take a picture of that. Now we're back to where we started our day off in Hyde Park. Not only is there a lot more people and a lot more activity, as I'm sure you can hear in the background, the light has changed drastically. It's a lot harsher. You can actually feel the heat of the sun now. The trees are much more illuminated. So we're wrapping up our session in Hyde Park. I just wanted to go over some of the things that are really standing out to me as being important to today's shoot. The main one being, how am I going to isolate this subject from my background? I'm used to shooting close-up nature photos with a macro lens or a longer lens in general, where I can just focus on my subject. The background is going to be blurred because of that shallow depth of field. I can then just focus on getting a nice color or a nice highlight in my background. With an iPhone, there's actually a lot more to consider because it has a much deeper depth of field, so a lot more elements are going to actually be in focus. That means you have to consider what's in your background a lot more. What I found really worked was positioning myself so that I have a cleaner background behind my subject. The one that worked the best for me today was shooting against the blue sky. The white leaves of the cherry blossoms really contrasted nicely against the blue sky, and with that early morning light, the sky looked really nice. The other way that worked really well was just to shoot away from the tree itself. When you're taking a picture of the white cherry blossom leaves against a tree that is filled with more white cherry blossom leaves, it can be really hard to actually focus on the subject in the image or find what the subject is in that image. Just positioning yourself to shoot away from that tree really helped to kind of break it up. It's definitely nicer to shoot into the tree if you can, and what I found worked really well in this situation is to find portions of the tree where the outer edge is in a brighter light than the inner edge that might be in shadow. This again helps to separate your subject, but using light. AE/AF lock was also really important to today's shoot. When I didn't use AE/AF lock, every time I took a picture, the iPhone would reset my autofocus. And then even if I moved slightly or the wind blew my subject slightly, sometimes it would drift and find a different part of the image to focus on. When you're working with close-up photos and you're already working on a shallower depth of field, that changing focus is really not ideal. Less is going to be in focus. It then becomes crucial that what is in focus is what you want your subject to be looking at. Light was obviously a huge consideration for today as well. We came early in the morning so that we could capture a nicer, softer, glowier light on these trees, and it really paid off. Early morning light was perfect for these trees. The light was low enough that you were still getting some shadow detail that you otherwise normally wouldn't get. It was also quite busy today, so removing distracting elements became quite important when shooting. I think at one point someone walked through with like a silver briefcase and just shot light straight into the camera, which I obviously cannot blame the person for. It's just something that I have to deal with. And the way that I dealt with that was changing my composition a little bit and positioning my subject in front of that person, and magically they're gone. Another important part of today was just simply staying aware to the photo opportunities around me. Even though I'm here to capture close-up cherry blossom photos in early morning light, still looking around to see other photo opportunities. In terms of compositional techniques that I used, I'll just rattle off a few that were really popping into my head as I was taking these photos. Balance is always a big one. Finding a way to balance the subject in my image with maybe a foreground or background element, or just simply the way that it's composed in my frame, is always at the forefront of my mind. Thinking about leading lines was very important as well. Trying to explore and trying to find new ways that I can use branches in my image to either lead to my subject or just generally create interest in the image was a fun technique to explore. And then exploring with different orientations was really important for me. I can typically get lost in shooting in portrait mode, pushing myself to, once I am happy with the photo that I got in portrait orientation, see if there's a way that I can then compose that in landscape mode. That just opens up a whole new way to actually compose that subject in your frame. That's going to be our wrap up on High Park. I hope that coming along with me for a photo shoot was useful for you. I feel like we came away from this with some good photos, but I don't like to look too much at my photos on location. I like to stay alert. I like to stay aware to what's going on around me. But we're gonna do that in the next section where we look through all of these photos and I walk you through my editing process.